state because it is. Sorry, I would ask the honourable member to wrap up his answer quickly. Quickly, please. Because there is a big war between democracies and authoritarian states. I'd like to thank the member for a liberal democracy, Wellington Halton Hales. And I just remind all members, when you're going to answer your question,
it's still working. It's just loading very slowly.
Look at me, and I will tell you how much time you have, so make sure you don't go over. The member for Edmonton Strathcona.
For his intervention, I find it shocking that he wasn't able to find even one example of how Netanyahu's administration could be criticized. But, you know, I'm interested. He talked about international law. He talked about rule-based international systems. Clearly, he would know that almost every single international expert has said that the actions of this Netanyahu government
actions
have
on the channel.
Reduced the rules-based international order. So I'd like him to tell me very clearly, what is the Conservative Party's position in terms of international justice? Would a Conservative government support the ICC and ICJ calls for justice that we've seen come through?
The honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for her question. I disagree with the premise of her question. I've seen no credible reports that indicate that the State of Israel has contravened international humanitarian law. I've also seen no credible reports
YouTube looks like
that the State of Israel has violated customary international law.
I'm going to ask the honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona to please
McPherson isn't going to
hold her time until she has an opportunity to speak when she's recognized. And I insist this for all members. I think all members, this is a very sensitive issue, and I congratulate all members for being very patient with each other as we explore a very sensitive issue. The honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills.
Considering last week, this debate has been fairly pretty respectful and responsible,
either international humanitarian law or customary international law. The number of civilians that have been unfortunately killed in this conflict is not an arbitrary determinant as to whether or not a state is complying with international law. I remind this House that the Allies during the Second World War
the only one I've had
killed
today.
400,000 German civilians, and that was not a war crime. Those were incidental to the targeting of military objectives. And I remind this House, Mr. Speaker, that the Luftwaffe killed 40,000 Londoners during the Second World War. And every one of those deaths, Mr. Speaker, was a war crime because the Luftwaffe deliberately targeted the civilian areas of East London and not military objectives. So, Mr. Speaker, the number of civilian deaths, however unfortunate, is not the determinant as to whether or not international humanitarian law has been breached.
The honourable member from Winnipeg South Centre.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. I listened as a former history teacher with great interest to the remarks from my colleague across the way. I actually want to shift for a moment, Mr. Speaker, to what's happening here domestically by virtue of what's happening overseas. I'm wondering if my colleague can comment on some of the trends that we have seen here in Canada, whereby by virtue of the way that one feels about the current government of the State of Israel,
the link on Twitter's
there
bad.
have been substantial implications for Jews, such as myself and those I represent across Canada. Can he speak, for example, to some of the calls for boycotting of so-called Zionist businesses and how he believes that this is a problem for us here in Canada as we try in our diaspora communities to deal with the impacts of what's happening overseas? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for the question. I think the federal government should show leadership in tackling the heinous rise in anti-Semitism in our country, in tackling the disorder in our public spaces and in our streets that are targeting Jews, that are targeting synagogues, and that are targeting Jewish institutions such as schools. And I believe that the public safety minister should convene a federal provincial solicitors general meeting in order to come to an agreement amongst the 10 provinces and the federal government that directives will be issued of general application to law enforcement in this country, that laws will be enforced against those that would use public disorder in our streets to target the Jewish community.
I know it's a
that's
serious
the kind
issue,
of leadership that I would expect from a
issue
government
directives
of Canada,
to enforce the law.
That I am convinced will be in place.
Is he suggesting
if
the
Conservatives
police aren't enforcing the
government.
law currently?
The honourable member from Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by sharing how much I agree with the member for Wellington-Halton Hills on the importance of the rules-based order. Appreciate his focus on international humanitarian law. Agree with him on condemning Hamas for their terrorist attack of October the 7th. But my question to him is about all parties following international humanitarian law. He was looking for examples earlier. I'll cite with him some here. Amnesty International, January 2019, quote, Israel's policy of settling its civilians in occupied Palestinian territory and displacing the local population contravenes fundamental rules of international humanitarian law. That was prior to October 7th. If he's looking for post-October 7th, January 26th, the International Court of Justice ordered Israel to take actions, 6, to prevent acts of genocide. Clearly, we would agree that's against international humanitarian law. Is he going to call for international humanitarian law to be followed by all parties or only some?
The honourable member from Wellington-Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, first, I want to thank the member for the question. Second, the International Court of Justice did not find that Israel had committed genocide.
That's not what he
asked. It
asked.
just asked the State of Israel to comply with the 1948 Genocide Convention, which Israel is in the process, which Israel has been doing. Secondly,
that was
of international humanitarian law. I disagree.
Yeah, he caught himself
with their interpretation of the facts on the ground. At the end of the day, there have been no credible reports that I have read that indicate that the State of Israel has committed war crimes or has had grave breaches of customary
They're in the process
law.
of complying with the Genocide Convention,
taking the hostages,
which is
some 250 hostages last October 7th, did commit war crimes. That is obviously a war crime. The Hamas, in executing and targeting some 1,100 innocent civilians, also committed war crimes. Those are findings that I think the international community
thought this
has
debate would have
to,
been over earlier, but I think we're probably not going to get to
Hamas,
Trudeau on uncommons
and for which they should be
unless
held
we listen to it on like double speed.
No. A very brief question and a very brief answer from the member from Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, I want to know the member's thoughts on the very idea that this government, who just reaffirmed its commitment to funding UNRWA, had the leader of Hamas in Lebanon, who was an UNRWA school teacher, just buried in Hamas regalia today. What does he think of that?
The honourable member from Halton Hills has 20 seconds to respond.
Especially with a 20-second
response. Canada should suspend immediately all funding to UNRWA. I think it's clear that UNRWA has a problem with certain number of employees that are supporters of Hamas and Hezbollah. That UNRWA has a problem with some of its facilities being used as staging grounds for terrorist activities, and that's why the Government of Canada should immediately suspend funding.
Please.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to tell you that I'll be sharing my time with the MP for Lac-Saint-Jean on the debate this evening. I think that at the outset there are statements that need to be made. The first is that regardless of how we see the conflict that has occurred since October 7th, one thing is clear tonight. Lebanon is currently in a war zone, and that despite all of the requests and all of the stances of the various parties, consensual or not, despite all of the appeals that we have made as elected officials and communities as well, the situation is escalating, and nothing that we have asked for or called for will change anything that's happening currently. It's a regionalization of the conflict, and there is a state of emergency, and that is why there is the need for the debate this evening. Another thing that we need to say is, despite the fact that there are few Canadian
That's a great question, Seth Rogen. If I had that, they're the bloc. They are Quebec. That's what their thing is. They represent
Canadian citizenship.
The interests of Quebec. So that's what I kind of love about the bloc is
national decides not
if anyone's going to surprise you sometimes, or it's like you think they're going to zig and then they zag.
To go to Lebanon, we can't say, well, the 45,000 Canadian nationals in Lebanon currently, we need to get out 45,000. We can't seek people out in their homes. They might have reasons to stay, and we can't criticize or judge those reasons. We don't know everyone's story. So we don't know, for example, who has a sick mother who isn't a Canadian national, who they need to stay with, and we cannot judge where a father of a family decides to go back, because
it's not that each individual one. It's just they're more of they're less definable on the left-right spectrum.
Canada has a responsibility to act as soon as Canadian nationals request to leave Lebanon. Another
where on some issues
observation is that Canada doesn't have the best track record recently.
Left-leaning
when it comes to evacuations.
A lot of their
there
positions
are lessons to be learned from the past,
Gaza conflict.
And tonight a lot of questions are being asked.
They've taken a lot of
think of the evacuation in 2006. Canada was criticized
positions that are
for
a lot more empathetic
because the messages that it sent to Canadian nationals
weren't. On the other hand,
were not received
on
because
things like immigration,
power
they'll
and therefore phone and internet
you
outages.
Could describe as more right wing because it's a lot about
they were only open during working days between 8 and 4.
All
so it's
what I'm trying to get at is what their position
government has acted relatively quickly,
usually is,
and intensively since August.
Has a lot more to do with internal
and it has been
Quebec
calling on
politics.
Canadian nationals to leave Lebanon. But for the future, there are still many questions that remain.
I mean, this is almost
what I will focus on this evening, because unfortunately the answers are not all known, but the questions are numerous.
They're like sort of
perhaps
a uniparty
an overview of the current situation. An estimated 40 to 45,000 Canadian nationals are located in Lebanon.
Direction of
about half
Quebec
of them
politics as a whole
have registered with consular services.
That's not super accurate.
4,000 have registered to be kept informed by Global Affairs of departure options.
But that's the thing. They're there to represent Quebec. They're not there to represent the left or the right or
100% filled.
Socialists
so the flights made available to Canadian nationals
in Lebanon
Quebec are not running at full capacity. And we know that some people are leaving Canada to go to Lebanon. And among the questions, and there are many, we cannot. The Canadian Armed Forces and Global Affairs both have expertise on the ground, but I hope that what I would like to raise, I'd like to have some reflections. There's perhaps things that we're not thinking of, and if that is raised at debate tonight, all the better. We should raise additional questions about to shed light on blind spots. I'd like to know about the channels of communication in the event of telephone or internet cuts. Have we thought about working with local media that is still active on the ground in Lebanon to advise Canadian nationals of the options available to them to leave the country? What happens with Canada's embassy in Lebanon? We know that in Kabul, the Canadian government
new tweet from our foreign affairs minister,
the embassy, which deprived
1,000 seats
nationals
between
of
now and Friday
services.
Leaving Lebanon.
What is
just
being
got 200 people out
for nationals or their family members whose travel documents are not up to date? Do we have options to fast track these documents? We know that IRCC is not the fastest department in the world. Do we have a way to streamline their documents? The supply of charter flights exceeds demand, but the situation may change. Is there a contingency plan to increase the number of charter flights? How much flexibility is there? And have priority lists already been drawn up? Given that the situation is reversed, if there's ever more demand than offer, we saw that in Afghanistan. We saw prioritization was an issue as well.
Oh yeah, no, you just slowly figure it out.
To what extent can the cost of these flights?
This whole stream is basically like, this is like scrap parts, and
we know that they cost about $455 per person. There are financing plans, but are they effective?
I feel like I've got it all working.
The economic situation in Lebanon. Could a family of 4 pay 4 times $445 to purchase
I guess I gotta
currently?
follow you on. Do I follow you on Twitch? I got it.
Once commercial flights have disappeared because currently they are dropping significantly.
Oh, I don't.
That more and more flights are being canceled. Is there a contingency plan for flights because given that there are not any available now? Could there be a sea evacuation? But what is the state of the port of Beirut? We know that there are many logistical problems. These sea evacuations would be directed to Cyprus. We know they received about 60,000 people in 2006. We have between 50 and 200 Canadian troops on the ground. Is that enough? Do we have the capacity to mobilize more if the need arises? As an example, the UK has 700 troops mobilized, but they have to evacuate only between 4,000 and 6,000 nationals in Lebanon. We see that
we could have upwards of
the proportion is much higher
Canadians
for the UK.
Who live in Lebanon for permanent residents.
Is it just Canadian residents and permanent residents and Canadian citizens who can use the flights in their evacuation, or can their immediate family use it too, even if they don't have their same status? That might help decide their whether to leave the country or not. What is the level of collaboration with other countries carrying out evacuations, which already notably Australia, which already has a sea evacuation plan? Do we have a partnership with those countries? Or with France, for example, which has naval vessels in the region and has already had an evacuation plan in place for several months, but it has not yet issued an evacuation order. Do we have a plan, and since when? And how will the evacuees be relocated here for those who haven't had family or a home port in a long time? Do we have a plan to welcome those people? Because that could also
holy crap,
make them decide to not leave.
No, you got flagged for SAC.
There are many questions that remain unanswered. It's just a reminder.
I guess SAC is too vulgar
the Block's attitude on this issue. We support the calls from the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I have very light profanity filters on. This is
asking citizens to do so as
not
much as
a family
they can
show.
While possible. We
will
not engage in useless partisan politics on the evacuation.
If you got a really smart
speeches tonight will testify to the fact that we are keeping a very close eye on the situation. We hope that we will help.
I'm saying that even if they're smart. Make them go watch all the reruns
the reflection
of the Daily
this
Show.
evening, because
they're
this is just
old
the
enough
point
to
of the
vote,
iceberg,
and then they can watch the stream.
We know that unfortunately the situation will deteriorate further, and we will benefit from the. We would like to say give our very best to everyone in this situation. It is a very horrible situation, and they are not responsible for it. And unfortunately, the situation risks to degrade further in the coming days. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I was like, wait, is that the Online Harms Act?
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me, what?
I'm sorry. Questions and comments?
Honourable member is.
I thought you were saying that.
Ask a question from anywhere in the House.
In reference to something they said in the debate.
From Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
how's my audio? We're not peaking too much because I keep seeing it going into the red, and I'm not sure if that's just when I'm yelling.
Questions about the evacuation and the role the Canadian Armed Forces are going to play. She and I worked very closely together on the National Defence Committee and want to ensure that there is the resources and the capabilities there to support the evacuation of Canadians from Lebanon. As someone that has constituents with family in Lebanon, I want to again reiterate, as many of our colleagues have, is if you have family there and that are Canadian citizens, please come home. Find a way out as quickly as possible. My question to her is, based upon the recent information about UNRWA and how the leader Hamas was killed in Lebanon, who was working for UNRWA, does she believe that UNRWA should be defunded by the Government of Canada?
Then I have Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Saint Jean. First of all, I just said that I didn't want to play partisan politics, but since I'm being asked this question, it's unfortunate when we're trying to debate
twist my arm.
The relevance or not of funding UNRWA is that at the end of the day, people who are penalized by this decision, who are the ones who need it, our help the most. So in the context, I think the question itself perhaps raises a certain lack of empathy towards people in critical situations, and I think given the context of this debate, it is deplorable.
Judo flipped that one on him.
And comments, the Honourable Member from London, Fanshawe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for her speech tonight. She asked a lot of good questions, things that the government needs to respond to. Absolutely. One of my questions, of course, is and to bring it back to civilians.
I thought she was going to take the bait, but then she was like,
"Oh, whoopah!" I've been told that there are many Christian.
You thought I was going to shake your hand, but I punch you in the face.
Have no evidence of Hezbollah leaders or
rhetorically, obviously,
their borders, and they are being devastated. I'm wondering if she's heard the same from some of her constituents and what she has to say about that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saint Jean.
Nice hearing.
No,
like
happily, I didn't hear about those stories, but I know that they do exist, and unfortunately, it comes back to what I said earlier. In a conflict, it's generally civilians who are the first impacted. And it's not just in Lebanon. We've heard the fact that the strikes are not precise and there is constantly collateral damage.
I'm so ready for this debate.
That's a euphemism when we talk about collateral damage in a context of war. And unfortunately, it is a situation that will continue to grow in the future.
I realize I have a dentist appointment tomorrow.
There are never just guilty victims in a context. The Bloc has a number of proposals to de-escalate. We have called for a ceasefire, and the goal is to decrease the number of civilian victims in this conflict. But I am not very hopeful, unfortunately, given the current context. I don't think there will be an improvement in the situation in the coming days. Questions and comments?
Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you,
I have not
Mr.
watched
Speaker.
JT's interview with Nate yet. I was going to watch it because I thought this was going to be over earlier, so I could fit it in before the debate.
Situation in Sudan. Now, the
might maybe watch it after the debate because it's only going to be 90 minutes.
And frankly, much of the violence we see around the world is the role being played by the Iranian regime, seeking to expand its control. It is now terrorizing the people of Lebanon through Hezbollah, of Palestine through the Palestinian territories through Hamas. It is terrorizing people of Iran through its continuing control of Iran. It's present in Iraq, in Yemen, and many other places. We should have acted much earlier. Does member support listing the IRGC, and why wasn't that acted? But it had nothing to do with Sachs. I wasn't thinking about the
I didn't mean to hit that. I'm out, damn it.
The Honourable Member.
Who hit that? Who pressed play on that? How could you?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, I was not at the committee with my colleague from Fort Saskatchewan, but we heard similar things at the defense.
Yeah, it sounded like it might be from the clips I was watching. So
the conflict is taking on a regional scale. Iran has tentacles in all sorts of places, even Ukraine. It's wrong to look at the influence of Iran through the lens of a two-country conflict. It has a large influence, a large and complex influence, and our response has to be very broad in general. As a Quebecer, I'm sorry, I do know the difference between Saint-Jean and Lac-Saint-Jean. Now over to the member for Lac-Saint-Jean. I can see how the names would sound similar. Was this for a question, or are you giving me the floor for a speech? Resuming debate, the honourable member has 10 minutes. Well, Mr. Speaker, I will try to be as relevant and eloquent as my colleague from Saint Jean. I think her intervention was the very image of a bloc speech. We try to speak without partisanship, especially during an emergency debate about issues that affect the people of Lebanon and populations in the region. So I will try to give a speech that rivals that of my colleague. First, as I begin my speech, I would like to express that my thoughts are with all of the families and peoples affected by the attacks. All too often, civilian populations are the first victims of armed conflicts. As my colleague noted, the situation in the Middle East and Near East is alarming and only seems to be deteriorating. After a week of intensive bombings, Israel launched a ground offensive in Lebanon. Up till now, Israeli airstrikes have killed almost 1,000 people and have injured over 2,770 people. Earlier today, we learned about the deaths of 2 Canadian citizens. Our worst nightmares seem to be coming true. The conflict is spreading to encompass the whole region. Once again, unfortunately, we are witnessing a lack of leadership from the federal government. I'll explain what I mean by this. As my colleague noted a little bit earlier, in 2006, the Canadian government evacuated almost 15,000 Canadian citizens, mostly by sea. At the time, there were between 40,000 and 50,000 Canadians in Lebanon. The Canadian government's intervention was criticized, not because of the intervention itself, but by how the government tried to get in touch with citizens. In 2006, the government had depended on phone messages and internet messages, while a large part of Lebanon had no power.
The audio clip now.
And phone lines were only available during working hours. It makes no sense, Mr. Speaker. Poor communications seem to be a theme for the federal government, Mr. Speaker. Be it during natural disasters or international conflicts. It would seem that the government is not able to learn from its mistakes. Unfortunately, the situation we are seeing today looks very much like that we witnessed during the evacuation of Afghanistan. I was on this special committee on Afghanistan in 2022, and my concern is that Canada did not learn from its mistakes. Once again, we are seeing a lack of leadership by Canada on the international scene. At the risk of repeating what my colleague noted, I will note that in May, the Bloc Québécois proposed 10 measures to the government, the Canadian government, about the Gaza conflict. Reiterate Canada's support for an immediate ceasefire and free circulation of medical and humanitarian assistance in the Gaza Strip. Reiterate that any effort to prevent the movement of humanitarian aid represents a war crime. Put in place a moratorium on arms exports to Israel. Support the Arab League in peacekeeping efforts. Apply sanctions against Israeli ministers aiming to commit war crimes, support the international legal efforts. Join the numerous countries that recognize the Palestinian statehood, all while reiterating support for a two-state solution. Support efforts by the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. Note that any effort to stop the movement of humanitarian aid represents a war crime and impose sanctions. Reiterate the rejection of Hamas and levy sanctions against supporters of terrorism. So those were some of the proposals by the bloc.
But it had nothing to do.
We add our voices to those of G7 countries who support the ceasefire proposal by the US and France. We hope that slowing things down will allow us to find a diplomatic solution. Canada's efforts need support. Right now, the conflict is expanding to Lebanon, and Israel is even bombing Beirut. Israel is preparing a ground invasion. It's not only preparing one, it has begun one. It seems to be targeted momentarily, but there are indeed ground operations going on in Lebanon. This is an alarming situation. A number of airlines have suspended flights to Lebanon, making it more difficult for people to get out of the country, including Canadian nationals. According to Global Affairs, there are 45,000 Canadian nationals in Lebanon, and efforts to evacuate them have been rather meager so far. All Canada has done has been reserve some seats on commercial flights. The federal government has reported that it has reserved 800 seats on commercial flights. In the meantime, many airlines have cancelled their flights for obvious reasons. The Canadian government has seems to have negotiated an agreement with an airline to keep flights going. But if the airport becomes dysfunctional, I don't understand how it will be possible to continue evacuating people by air. What is more, the Canadians will have to pay for their own flights at market rates. That's not always easy with the Lebanese economy as it is, especially when you have a big family.
Hey, Silver, how are you doing?
Lebanon only has the one airport. I'm worried that people will spend lots of money to buy flights that they won't be able to get on.
It does kind of sound like it could happen any time, if it hasn't already basically started.
Just because you reserve a flight does not mean you will be able to get on it. We also know that there's the possibility of evacuating people by sea, but only if ships are available. And there, Mr. Speaker, we just don't have enough information to make a judgment. What is more, since 2019, Lebanon has been in an unprecedented economic crisis. On August 4th, 2020, a massive explosion devastated the city of Beirut and destroyed Lebanon's biggest port. Not only that, that port was the main gateway for food entering the country. I seriously doubt the ability of ensuring a safe evacuation of Canadians by sea. Lebanon has already had to deal with economic insecurity and a refugee crisis. Now they are dealing with airstrikes and a ground invasion.
Well, let me...
Mr. Speaker, as I noted at the beginning of my speech, the situation is an alarming one.
The file to
it looks like it will only get worse.
Or the video to audio. Yeah, special forces. As we witness
what is going on,
like a full
my
actual
thoughts and the thoughts
invasion.
of all those in the House tonight.
Oh, because I'm.
Are to be with people who are living through fear, real fear.
I haven't updated it yet.
All too often and all too sadly, civilians are the first victims of armed conflicts. They deserve all the help we can provide as parliamentarians. As such, Mr. Speaker, I ask all parliamentarians taking part in the debate tonight to do their best to imagine a family hiding in a Beirut apartment building, a mother and a father and their children, trying to keep themselves protected. I don't think they are aware that we're debating about them in the House tonight. But I would ask all my colleagues to think of that family. And perhaps avoid political games and a political joust. Act honestly and sincerely. I would sincerely encourage all of my colleagues to think of that family and their children. If we really want to, we can answer some of the questions asked by my colleague from Saint-Jean. All we have to do is work productively, thinking about Lebanese families. We can have at least a small impact, even if we're thousands of kilometers away from the conflict. Are we able to sit down together, work together, and save lives? That, Mr. Speaker, ought to be our primary concern tonight. That's how I would encourage my colleagues to think. Think about the people who are fearing for their lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I would like to thank my colleague. I know him to be a strong defender of human rights and a very serious member of Parliament. His constituents are lucky to have him. My question is, you know, I spent today speaking to Edmontonians, speaking to Lebanese Canadians who are very desperate to get more information on how to get their loved ones out of Lebanon. Unfortunately, right now, a lot of the application process happens online. The people that I spoke to, their loved ones have no power.
No,
there is
not
no
another
internet
New York
access.
Though Melanie Jolie was at the UNGA, and I was going to watch that too, but
zone, and yet they are so
ran out of
desperate
time
to be able to get their loved ones out, and they don't know who to turn to. So the response by the government, as
events,
always
dear
in these
boy,
war,
events.
in these war situations, depends
To
on a
quote
level
Churchill
of
by
stability
way
that is
of
not currently
empowers
available in Lebanon.
on
And
power
I'm
politics.
wondering what he thinks the government could do to help with those individuals.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague from Edmonton,
what?
Strathcona.
Cool Richard's Crusade?
I've
what?
had the
Who is
pleasure
Cool
of working
Richard?
with her on a number of human rights files.
Oh, no.
I know that she's someone sincere and dedicated when it comes to human rights. To answer her question, I hope that the Canadian government realizes the urgency and the alarming nature of the situation. I hope that the government heard the speeches from all of my colleagues in the House today. The question asked by my colleague from Saint-Jean was a relevant one. But we have answers to the questions she asked. At least, I hope we do. And if we do, we can form solutions. I worked with my colleague from Edmonton, Strathcona, on the Special Committee on Afghanistan. One recommendation on that committee was for GAC and IRCC to have a standing plan for international conflicts. The government promised to implement this, and they failed to do so. Questions and comments?
Honourable Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to connect with people representing the We Want to Live movement. And this is a movement that I think should have gotten and should still get more attention and publicity.
Dang it. Did I just break the bumper?
Palestinians living in Gaza who are opposing Hamas. In fact, in the summer leading up to October 7th, there were significant protests of Palestinians speaking out against Hamas. As part of this We Want to Live movement, saying we don't want our lives to be instrumentalized in this violence. We want to be able to have normal lives where we're not constantly being instrumentalized in this struggle. What they have asked for is the opportunity to not be under Hamas oppression, to have safe spaces where they can start to build alternative infrastructure of governance without Hamas oppression. I'd be curious for this member's comment on that. Are there ways we can support these movements by supporting efforts to rid Palestinian territories of terrorist organizations like Hamas?
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. I'm a little troubled by that question, I would say, Mr. Speaker. In the same question, my colleague first said that there's a group that's upset about being weaponized by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I support that. These are people who are standing and speaking with courage. They do not want to be instrumentalized. Well, then they don't want to be instrumentalized in an emergency debate. This is an emergency debate about how to create peace in Lebanon and how we can
judo flipping all of these
danger,
sort
as
of
well as Canadian
attempts to sideline the conversation
who need help to get out. What I'm hearing is that my colleague instrumentalized a group for partisan reasons, despite the fact that their plight has nothing to do with the question we are debating. We have time for a 10-second question and a 10-second response.
Lady Smith.
Merci.
Thank you. And I'll try not to take 10 minutes. We know that there are tens of thousands of Canadians.
God, it's still too long.
In Lebanon who risk being killed or injured. According to my colleague, why did the government not move to prevent this invasion into Lebanon? I would like to thank the honourable member for her French. I'll give the member for Lac-Saint-Jean 20 seconds. Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to congratulate my colleague on her French.
There we go. We figured it out eventually.
The Liberal government failed in the last international crisis. Now there's a debate. They have an opportunity to right the ship, hear ideas, implement them, and get to work. Resuming debate.
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will be sharing my time with the member of Brampton Centre. Mr. Speaker, I want to start my comments tonight in light of today by stating that Canada unequivocally condemns Iran's reckless attack against Israel. These attacks demonstrate yet again the Iranian regime's disregard for peace and stability in the region. It puts civilians at risk, has forced millions across countries into bomb shelters in search of safety, and only seeks to further escalate the conflict. Israel has the right to defend itself and its people. Canada fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against this attack, and we call for the safety of all civilians in Israel and in Lebanon. We are only a few days away from the one-year anniversary of October 7th.
Not moving, dude.
The deadliest attack on Israeli soil. We continue to feel the immense pain and grief experienced by so many on October 7th, and in the devastating 361 days since. A day where 8 Canadians lost their lives at the hands of Hamas. We mourn their loss as a Jewish community, but also as Canadians. For 361 days, daughters,
I can
sons,
already feel
sisters and brothers, mothers, fathers, and
I think I just saw a tweet from him, but that was probably that was about an hour ago.
Hamas. Their families and we all demand for them to come home. There can be no resolution without the return of the hostages. On October 7th, 1,100 lives were lost on that tragic day, and the loss of life every day since has been horrific.
I think I got the button working, but I'm not pressing it now.
In so many different parts of the world, in so many communities, including here in Canada. As Josh Poland, father of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, a member of my home community in Jerusalem, said so well, in the competition of pain, there are no winners. There is only the loss of loved ones. We continue to call for all hostages to be released, for Hamas to lay down its arms, for international law to be respected, for civilians not to be used as human shields, and the escalating violence in the region to end. The escalation of violence today and over the last several weeks does nothing but further perpetuate the cycle of violence that harms everyone in the region. The violence and attacks perpetuated by Hezbollah on Israeli soil are unacceptable, but we must remember that this is not a new front to this war. Lebanon has been held in the grips of Hezbollah for decades, impacting the lives of Israelis and Lebanese civilians for years. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization backed by Iran. This horrific war and its escalation did not happen in a vacuum, Mr. Speaker. Within days of October 7th, Hezbollah began launching rockets into northern Israel, escalating the conflict, creating a two-front war, and resulting in more than 70,000 Israelis being displaced. This escalation only serves to upend the lives of Lebanese civilians who live along its border. It creates devastation and disrupts the lives of Lebanese and Israelis alike. It is not enough to say that the violence has to stop and to say that there needs to be a ceasefire. Because if, at the end of this ceasefire and the cessation of violence, Hamas and Hezbollah are still armed, then we've gotten us no closer to ending this cycle of violence. This is why a two-state solution is imperative. This is why recognizing terrorist organizations for what they are is critical to understanding that in a multilateral world, these are not militias or state actors. These are terrorist organizations who do not play by the rules of what we recognize as a rules-based order. They put civilians at risk. The cost they exact on civilian populations for their own agenda is what we need to recognize and fight against. They use the lives of civilians, of children, of families. They use their lives and the infrastructure and the homes that they live in to wage a war of terror on civilians across the region. Where the value of civilian lives are irrelevant in the terror that they exact is what we need to recognize and address. The people of Lebanon deserve to live in peace and security, free from conflict and from Hezbollah's Iran-backed terrorism. So do Israelis, and so do Palestinians. The populations of the region deserve nothing less than our collective support as an international community to end this conflict. The only way forward is a safe and secure future for Israelis and Palestinians and a lasting two-state solution. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, Mr. Speaker, the Jewish New Year, let us take pause at understanding what needs to be demanded in the context of a ceasefire. It's not as simple as demanding for the violence to stop. It's about ensuring that in the day after, Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace, security, and dignity, because all civilians have a right to live within their homes and in their communities. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow, Jewish communities will hear the sound of the shofar. It is blown every year to mark the beginning of the new year for all to hear, a spiritual awakening of sort. But the shofar has also been known to be used as a call to war. As we head into the year 5785, I want to wish Jewish communities throughout the world that the shofar be blown as a symbol of peace, and that we no longer need the sirens of war. Shana Tova, and may the new year bring peace and security for all in the region.
That's where I expected that to go, but I was like, wait.
Question, come on to
wild
questions
pivot.
and comments. The honourable member from Fort Saskatchewan, Sherwood Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask this member a question about the role that the Iranian regime is playing, instigating violence against Israel, against peoples throughout the Middle East, and of course violence against the people of Iran itself. 6 years ago, this House passed a motion calling on the government to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. In fact, members of the government, all present that day, voted in favor of that motion. But it took 6 years for there to be any implementation of this motion. And unfortunately, in the intervening time, we saw the further expansion of that regime's influence, the further empowering of terrorist organizations, which have continued to victimize people throughout the region and, in fact, many here in Canada. We never got an answer from the government throughout that time about what their plans were. In retrospect, does the member believe the government should have listed the IRGC much earlier, and that more could have been done to limit its terroristic reach if it had been put on that terrorist list when the House initially voted to do so?
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll thank the member for his question and simply say this: I don't deal in a world of hypotheticals. I deal in the world as it is, and for every decision to list a terrorist organization, there is a very careful and highly secure process of
check
intelligence
the
gathering and preparation
sound
that
alerts.
must be done, and I trust the government to do that work to ensure that it lists every organization as a terrorist organization responsibly.
Honourable Member for Saint-Jacques. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for their speech. She referred to the fact that she's living in a world where there is no room for hypothetical questions, so here's a very concrete question. There are people, as we speak, who are victims of the conflict in Lebanon who are not parties to it, and they're asking the question of how they will get out of there once they have made the decision to do so, because there might be reasons motivating them to stay. So has the government learned lessons from the past, and does the minister have a priority for the government to work on in terms of evacuating the citizens when they ask for it? Honorable Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci à ma collègue.
I'd like to thank my colleague for the question.
As in any war
Also, I know this is
situation,
not the appropriate time to bring it up, but I am flabbergasted that the Olivia Nuzzi RFK story apparently just keeps getting messier.
The decision to leave is hard. I've grown up in war. I know how hard it is to leave family and loved ones and the place you cherish behind. That being said, the government's been very clear for months that there was a fear of escalation in the region, and for people from Canada who wanted to visit family back home to take pause on that choice. And if they made that choice, that they make plans to be able to leave. This conversation with Lebanese Canadians has been going on for months. Nevertheless, we understand the responsibility to get civilians out who are Canadians and are doing what we can. But at this point in time, my understanding is there are still options to get out, and we are assisting as much as we can. Can we do more? We can always do more. In a conflict zone, it is challenging.
The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Very much, and I have a comment I'd like to make. First of all, through you, Mr. Speaker, I just want to express my sadness and my sympathy with the member. I know that she has family that are in Israel, and I know what she has suffered over the last number of months has been horrific. I also want to acknowledge that Jewish people across this country, Palestinian people across this country, Muslims, Arabs have faced such incredible racism and such discrimination. Even within this House, we have seen this member be a victim of discrimination and of horrific hate speech, in my opinion. I'd like her. I just wanted to give my sympathy and to express my support with her. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the member for her comments. You know, Mr. Chair, what is so special about this place is that we talk, we debate, we don't always agree, and sometimes we don't always agree quite strongly, but at the same time, our jobs as parliamentarians is to build bridges in communities, to see each other in their pain, and to help in that process of healing and making our country stronger. So I want to thank the member for her comments.
We're pleased to debate.
Resuming debate.
The honourable member from Brampton South. Excuse me, Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to address the situation in Lebanon. The armed conflict intensifying and widening. The first duty of any government to protect its citizens from harm. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and her department has been asking Canadians and permanent residents to leave Lebanon as soon as possible. For months, she has been warning that the war may expand. Going beyond warnings, the minister and her department have also secured hundreds of seats on flights to safety for Canadian citizens and permanent residents. The Minister of Immigration is also working hard to ensure that Canadian citizens and permanent residents in Lebanon whose documents are out of date will be able to renew their documents and will be able to fly out of the conflict zone. The Canada Border Agency issuing a temporary halt on removal to Lebanon because of the war. According to Global Affairs website, Canada and Lebanon has strong ties. The Lebanese community in Canada include between 200,000 to 400,000 people. And an estimated 40,000 to 75,000
switch over
Canadians
to the
live in Lebanon.
EP debate.
The relationship is strengthened by close cultural ties and common participation in La Francophonie. Canada is represented in Lebanon by its embassy in Beirut and increased its diplomatic presence there in response to the crisis in Syria. Lebanon is represented in Canada by its embassy in Ottawa. Since 2016, Canada has committed over $475 million to support Lebanon's stability and resilience as it copes up with effects of the conflicts in Iraq and Syria and catastrophic explosion at the Beirut port in 2020. Lebanon now hosts more than an estimated 350 Syrian refugees that have been added to the country's already existing refugee population, which also includes Palestinian, Iraqis, and Kurds. Between 2016 and 2022, Canada will have committed over $4 billion humanitarian development, military and stabilization, and security assistance for the region, including Lebanon. With an emphasis on building stability, governance, and long-term resilience in the immediate aftermath of August 4, 2020, explosion of the port of Beirut, Canada provided $30 million in emergency humanitarian assistance and early recovery support, and then announced another $20 million in August 2021 to support the economic recovery of Beirut. This funding has helped trusted partners address immediate humanitarian needs and is supporting efforts for early recovery and resilience. Canada's support for Lebanon's security and social stability includes projects that aim to reduce tension between refugees and host communities under pressure, as well as community security projects that strengthen the capacity of local police services and the Lebanese armed forces to prevent and respond to conflict and violent acts of extremism. Mr. Speaker, I wish that October 7th attack on Israel would not have happened, and those innocent civilians would not have been killed. And
apologies
those
to
innocent hostages would not have been taken.
The esteemed
reminder that as president, whoever is president, faces all sorts of unexpected challenges that suddenly can prop up. And, it'll be interesting to see tonight exactly how that factors in to the debate. Cecilia?
All right, Ed, you don't get to go anywhere. We're going to be checking back in with you when it is all over. And we are now just officially minutes away from the start of this debate. I want to get your final thoughts. Major, I want to start with you because we've been saying so much is on the line tonight. How much of tonight is about the audience of one for J.D. Vance?
A considerable amount. President Trump has expectations for J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance knows, as Robert Costa so thoroughly laid out, at age 40, his entire political career is ahead of him. If this ticket does not prevail, the Republican Party will find itself in an uncomfortable and unwelcome and unwanted post-Trump era. What role does J.D. Vance play in that? A considerable amount of that decision will be drawn from what he does tonight. He knows that. In contrast, Governor Walz is 60, 1 year older than Kamala Harris. He does not have any obvious designs on the presidency if Kamala Harris wins and serves out 2 terms. He's there to enhance the ticket as it exists and amplify things on the positive side where and when he can. Very different calculations, very different risk factors for the two.
And Bob, even if you're Bob Dole, who had a bad night in 1976, he was the nominee 20 years later for the Republican Party. So you can even rescue yourself from a bad night. What are your final thoughts on tonight?
Everybody in the press, when we're in the press galleries on the campaign planes, they talk about these vice presidential debates as low impact, but they really are high stakes. Everybody watching tonight knows one of these two men could become president of the United States. The country's going to take a temperature on character, on policy. Who are these people who might lead the country? And one of them might be leading the country should a crisis happen, a heartbeat away from the presidency. We live in a time of assassination attempts on the Republican nominee, of political violence, and of aging politicians. So it's no question that one day one of these people could be president. We hope all people live healthy lives and serve full terms, but you never know in American history. You
never know.
History always tells us.
Nancy, the other big event is these incredible floods in North Carolina, which also is a platform for presidents.
It is, because
They
handling
only
the
have
natural
7.
disasters is
Come
often
on,
a
people,
proxy
get some
for voters,
1080p
of
streaming.
confidence. They look at how you handle something like that, and they say this person is capable of handling big, important
these
things.
scuffed
And that's
national
why President
broadcasts.
Biden tomorrow is heading to
Americans
North
had better
Carolina and
production
South Carolina
quality.
and Florida and Georgia the next day.
And here we see the vice presidential
they're taking
candidates
response.
there. Tim Walz standing a lone
These
man
waltzes.
behind his lectern. Ed, give us your last thoughts as we watch here as
Vance doesn't even
J.D.
show
Vance
up.
is off in the
Oh,
wings.
no, there he is.
Oh, there he is.
It's performance. That seems obvious, but no faux pas, and they're looking for a viral moment. That's what they'll be looking for tonight.
No handshake.
No fun back and forth between those two.
There you have Governor
Waltz
Walz
just blowing them
taking
off.
some notes.
Goes
J.D.
right
Vance
into
doing
note-taking.
the same as our colleagues.
Because Waltz, I think,
Or
tried to
shaking
say
hand
something
before-
like
the
it cut the
That's
tension,
right.
and Waltz just
Well,
he
we
didn't
have
respond, I
the
don't
vice
think.
presidential debate coming up in a moment.
And the
It
mics
will
are going to be
moderated
hot
by
all
our
night,
own Nora
which is
O'Donnell and
fantastic.
Margaret Brennan. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz take the stage. Well, they've taken the stage, so stick with us here and join us also on our streaming channel, CBS News 24/7, for exclusive content you won't see anywhere else. Thank you for joining us.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets.
Just so we know that that's the tone that's been set.
Tonight, with just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become Vice President of the United States. Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris
Here
as
we go,
the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America
Yeah, what do we think? What are the what's the
vice
odds
presidential
of a couch?
debate?
He makes a reference to the couch.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world.
electoralism
We
pill,
have a
Chimera.
consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance, tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate, who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns.
So they can
the
mute.
stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us.
Nope, just
started.
You're right on time.
Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East.
100 messages.
Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action.
Opening statements.
President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists
the whole failed part
massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took
Also,
prisoners.
is every question going to be from the perspective that, like, the president is dead and now they're the president?
To defend itself is absolutely fundamental.
Or is it just in,
getting its hostages back, fundamental,
maybe Kamala
and ending the
incapacitated.
humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming
I think he said Israel there when
attack.
he meant Iran.
But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter.
I don't think he meant to say
it's
Israel
clear,
and its
and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks
I
ago.
think he'll be okay
a nearly
there.
80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need
in this moment.
He said Israel.
He definitely meant Iran.
But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous.
In fairness,
his chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House.
Well, I mean, this is
now,
probably
the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter.
And away from the question.
Our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea. When we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
This is
Governor, your time is up.
Might
Senator
be where
Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive
much more
strike
extensive
by
media
Israel
training
on
might
Iran? You
give
have
him
2
a
minutes.
bonus.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate.
He got there
I want to answer the
eventually.
question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working-class family.
See, that's how you do that.
My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me, and she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction.
Zero to opening statement in 5 seconds flat.
I went to college on the GI
barely
Bill
even touched
after I
on the
enlisted in
actual
the Marine
substance
Corps
of the
and
question.
served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies.
I thought that was it, but I was like,
is that
like a racist
I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Didn't want to say that.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump.
He does. I will say this. I think J.D. Vance does have pretty eyes. I'll agree with you.
Iran's nuclear program in the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops,
to stand by the truth and liberty.
Donald Trump wrote it off.
And say, no, you move.
Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause
That's why everyone
parts
keeps
of its
accusing him
and President
of wearing
Trump
eyeshadow, because he's just one of those dudes that has the naturally pretty eyes.
He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blamed Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that
First link, Times of Israel, sorry.
An American
terror
president
attacks
didn't have a major
after
conflict
Trump
break out?
Jerusalem
the only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you.
Figures released by Saudi service show 249 incidents December, most of them fire bombings, compared to 84 in November.
160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents
kind of
on a
nuts
roof
to
with
me
a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them
Mala
because the roof collapsed
gone to visit.
and those innocent people lost their lives.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Governor Walz
like
joins
Obama
me
went,
in saying our hearts go out to those innocent
4?
people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job. And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about
is a very good point.
Is a concern about carbon emissions. This idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true. Just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science, let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers. Even as a press guy, my suggestion would be don't tell the press, do like a surprise appearance, and then that would look even better.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane, and my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as
obviously, I think probably
co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship; they work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, make sure they're there so that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen.
I'm not going to be the only
Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned
Walz
that
has shaken off a bit of those jitters. That was a more...
Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious,
I don't know if it works properly,
more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years. Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing worse by the climate.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our #1 export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting?
Well, I think that's kind of
things
what
that
Waltz is like. He didn't say fracking.
But to call it a hoax and to
but I don't think anyone really likes fracking. Even the people who are like,
give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate.
Like, I'm the fracking guy. We did so much fracking.
We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work?
Be more specific.
For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do?
Commercial
so we've
break,
got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border.
Most of them are probably
I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for
them
all
to
of
say
us.
About the
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as
That's
drug
easy to say
mules,
until
among
you
other things.
go up against all of the businesses who enjoy paying the immigrants less than
this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history.
Yeah, no, Vance has had a lot more experience.
But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state in a border
He's a
state
debate
in
bro
California.
guy.
She's the only person in this race who prosecuted
the kind of
transnational
space he
gangs for
thrives
human
in.
trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done
Twitter?
By the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big.
It is funny how easy,
less than 2% of that
how
wall got
quickly
built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime.
Democratic candidates, when challenged by Republicans, will be like, "Actually, I'm more Republican than you."
Dehumanizing people and telling him what he was going to do.
Actually, I'm tougher on
immigrants. At one point, Senator Vance
actually,
said it was so unworkable
we
to be
produce
laughable.
more oil.
So that's where we're at. Pass the bill.
On a question about
she'll sign it.
immigration and
Governor, your time is
climate
up.
change.
Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border.
We already have it, so then we might as well keep doing it.
I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate
freely
in this country, and we know that they use.
Don't nod at that,
Waltz. It is a disgrace.
What are you doing?
And it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary. But the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Lankford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
He does have that sort of...
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just
nervous
ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker,
stage tick
you
where you
know
just
that
start
Congress controls
speeding
the purse
through
strings
all
and
your lines.
Funding. So you have said
just
repeatedly
even
that
like
Donald
subconsciously,
Trump
just because you're nervous, you start to go faster and faster and faster, just so you can
disagree.
So you can
Congress
stop
controls
talking
the
and
purse
people
strings
can
and
stop
we need to
like
support
paying attention to
many
you
of the
for a
changes
second.
that you would actually want to implement. You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our border czar, Kamala Harris, has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield.
So
and he's
weird
very
that
worried
like the
about
czar
the
is
things
just
that
a
I've
thing
said in
that,
Springfield.
like I know
Look,
I've gone through the whole
and in
etymology of how
all
it
across
happened,
this
but
country, you've got
that's so
schools
weird.
that
It's
are
always been so
overwhelmed.
weird
You've got
to me
hospitals that are overwhelmed.
they just have czars
You've got
of
housing
things.
that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes.
About
the
how she's
people
not
that I'm
actually
most worried
that.
about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens.
I mean, that one's a
who
little
have
bit
had
of
their
just
lives destroyed by Kamala
stretching the
Harris's
truth.
open border. It is a disgrace, Tim.
And border
I actually
czar
think-
is not
I
an
agree with you.
actual
I think you wanna
official
solve this
title
problem,
that
but I don't
basically
think that
anyone is
Kamala
given.
Harris
That's
does.
like a
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute
that's
to
a
respond.
journalistic artifact.
It is law
like
enforcement
a journalistic
that asked for the bill.
shorthand.
They helped craft it.
In
They're
US
the ones that
political
supported it.
journalism.
That's because they know we need to do this.
Like
Look, this issue
president
of
doesn't actually
continuing to
appoint
bring this
anyone
up,
like
of not dealing with
border
it,
czar.
of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done.
Yes.
This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply
It came
want
about
order
during the
to it.
Roosevelt
This bill
administration.
does it. It's funded. It's supported by the
During
people who
the
do
Second
it, and
World
it lets us
War.
keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to
There were
clarify
12 of
for
them.
our viewers,
Franklin
Springfield,
Roosevelt
Ohio
had
does
12
have a
czars.
large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
We're
because
going to turn now to the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys
Executive
did a fact check, and since you're fact checking,
generally executive
I think it's
branch
important to
officials
say what's
pointed to
actually
the head
going
of the
on.
executive
So
branch.
there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much.
the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
want to have.
One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Let them
Gentlemen,
just debate amongst
The
themselves
audience can't
with
hear
the,
you
with
because
the
your mics are
mic
cut.
off. No, we can
have
hear
so
them.
much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works
well,
best.
As a Canadian,
More
I cannot
people are participating
vote,
in it,
I will
and
not be
folks
writing
have
in
the
anyone.
things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border, and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this.
Technically, you can say the exact same thing about everything Walz is saying.
Listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald
Trump. Because
Biden
did all those
things. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
Why does it keep trying to flag SAC?
But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods.
It was a little
bit
different
about
from
that.
what
they said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant,
like I said, Vance has so much more media training
that it would somehow make
and
us
awareness
better
of how
off,
he's like coming off.
And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
That rang a bell.
Can you address that? I mean,
to our Canadian listeners, we're not going to listen to experts. We're going to listen to common sense.
If you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that.
Yeah.
But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics show that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay.
This is Vance's element.
You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household.
Someone call the OLL because Vance
to
is
not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400. Town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot, I will get caught up in the rhetoric, but being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID, and I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world.
There you go.
It's
There's
about
some
trying
fight in
to
Vance.
do the best you can for your community, and then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor.
That was
Senator
good. She
Vance,
just stayed quiet and let him keep talking.
In 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've said,
we're getting messy
many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear, and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden.
This is probably
but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And
you're right. He should have kept this to
the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration. It's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Yeah, Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says. But look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade.
They said they were doing 4 commercial breaks, but I guess
and
not.
And then he tells us,
it's about 45 minutes in, unless they're backloading them entirely.
Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky,
David Zukoff with another one hitting out of the park. Everyone should get one do-over on calling someone America's Hitler.
Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, This is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
He's doing good
Senator,
here because I think that he actually got some passion in his voice
pregnancy
there.
monitoring agency?
No,
so I think that was probably one of his
better
better
talk about this
like
issue,
answers.
I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree.
You could feel the oomph
with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And you know, one of them is actually very dear to me, and I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Almost zero
would you like
overlap
to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
People interested enough to watch this debate and
made the accusation
truly
that wasn't true
undecided
about Minnesota.
voters.
Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber
I feel like
Thurman.
if you're
She
an
happened to be in
undecided
Georgia,
voter, there's
a
no way
restricted
you
state.
even know this
because
debate
of that,
is happening.
she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris is supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience.
I don't know.
We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe,
it seemed like he was about to get dragged into like a
increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget, Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on. And we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate.
It does kind of feel like appealing to the refs. Did not explain what the fact check was, at least. Donald Trump on Truth Social. Both young ladies have been extremely biased anchors. Honestly, I didn't even know. There's a part of me that almost like that kind of reads that as a compliment. Because the worst he said was that they're
when you wake up in the morning,
I mean it's condescending as all hell.
One of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a
but only specifically because
like this is unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work.
I'm just gonna say what I was originally gonna say rather than get myself in trouble. He's like he's so old. He's like, look at these young whippersnappers.
Weekdays at 7.
He's fresh out of college.
It didn't seem like anything
first job having journalists, clearly.
Nothing ever happens in East Palestine. But it did.
Yes, here we go. I was just about to say that. I need to pee as well.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
How that all played out?
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Superstar approaching, superstar approaching.
Let's get your popcorn and get ready.
Come on, Julia. Oh, no. I will if you will. You go, gal.
Yeah, boy! She's the first black woman on the Supreme Court, and she's determined she won't be the last.
My parents had raised me to believe that I could do anything I wanted to do.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson on Person to Person.
Superstar approaching, superstar approaching.
I can see clearly now that the rain is gone.
That's right. Look at his outfit. Give me some love, baby.
Up top.
It's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day.
All right.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s.
Gun debate. Here we go.
So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff.
Don't laugh when you say that.
And we do have to do better.
Don't
and I think
chuckle.
that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents.
That's the sound of thousands of reporters trying to track down what shooting that was.
And they were asking us to do
after
something.
the Tiananmen
and
Square
look, I'm
line.
a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things
Actually,
that
I
work.
think J.D. Vance likes it when there's school shootings.
And seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there.
Yeah,
no
basically.
one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns.
Have
but I
your
ask all
doors.
of you out there,
We'll
do
stop
you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting, and I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety.
School shooting
I'm
victims?
of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family.
One of these dudes says,
we need to make
BlackRock,
it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said,
come on,
this program
do
that
it.
the Vice President
is
pushing forward and bringing a new way
Just
of
say
approaching
BlackRock
this
once
is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back. And you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stocks.
It's true, but you definitely shouldn't have said it.
And we're implementing a state program to make sure
they're
we get
apparently
some of that
not
down payment
allowed
assistance.
to interact with staffers or anyone during the breaks.
People with
That's
stable
one of the
housing
rules.
end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to be able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in. But we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affording affordable housing,
things he's more
but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create
No, I don't know if they're allowed to interact with anybody.
Base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise
because they're not allowed to bring up notes either, so it's to stop them from being
remove regulation,
given anything.
provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes
He's a football
prices.
coach. He gave himself a pep talk.
Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer where? Yeah.
With Burt Reynolds?
Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Yes.
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national parks.
Hey, Rango, how are you?
And they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land?
In general?
And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this.
Vance tried to flip it there, but he didn't say BlackRock.
Some of these houses, we're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Waltz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that is most weird, like housing into a commodity,
he's the one that
is giving
basically
it away to millions upon millions of people
this guy's weird thing, and he's been holding his fire the entire debate.
You can very quickly reply.
Like, I put that in as the Minnesota nice is like ironic, but this isn't even Minnesota nice, because Minnesota nice is like,
I don't know which ones are federal, but I
subtly very mean and cutting.
People think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house on fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get through. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, I have concepts of a plan. Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that
I don't know if
salvaged
YouTube's working very well,
which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think it's
just the delay
about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic.
Do not quote the old legislation to me, which I was there when it was written.
Affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is if you're healthy, why should you be paying more?
Yeah, see, like this is another one of those questions where you can tell he like is passionate about the subject.
You pay your
so that you can like tell the question, the answer is a lot better.
To you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. Like, that's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris
you can definitely tell which things he's not super
ACA.
Like.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better.
Questions where the fire isn't lit in his belly
is actually not true. A lot of what happened and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And
although that's not really a gotcha. That's like
that's
to suggest that the program is
and Republicans fought
successful
tooth and nail,
it's just going to keep
saying,
more
Americans
people
should be free to do this. Well, then what
happens? So you think the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works.
That is kind of funny. That one should have been fact-checked.
You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret.
Kamala made everything better.
We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret.
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better.
How long?
They stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very
humble brag
corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually she had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of child care model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with child care. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide child care in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care.
We want money to put all of our toddlers into a...
And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the
past
past 7 or 8 weeks.
Just leave them there for the day.
One of the biggest complaints I hear from young
Get a
families
sheepdog,
is
look after
people who feel like they
Give us
don't
money.
have options, like they're
We should
choosing
get federal-
between going to work or taking
sorry,
care
that's
for their
so
kids.
fucked up.
That is an incredible burden to put on American families.
that's
We're the only
South-phobic.
country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
I apologize
Senator,
to whichever
thank you.
state
You have also
accent
said,
that
Senator
sounded most
Vance,
like.
many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care
exactly.
as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this.
You know,
President Trump
I look at my kid.
recently
He plays
said,
Minecraft all the time, and I thought,
as
what
much
if
as
I just put him in
childcare's
an
talked
actual
about
mine?
as
He can
being
find all the
expensive,
diamonds he
it's
wants.
relatively
There's even creepers
speaking,
down there.
not very expensive.
Maybe he'll
compared
find
to
the Elder
kinds of
Dragon
numbers
if
we'll
he
be
goes deep
taking
enough.
in. Is President Trump committed
I don't know why
to
I
the
keep doing a southern
$5,000
voice.
per child tax
what
credit
Vance sounds
that
like. He's
you
from
have
Ohio.
described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a
All
little
Americans
bit, is
sound like
that
cowboys.
we're going to
That's
be
the-
taking
that's
in
what I
a
hear
lot of
every time
money
I
by
hear
penalizing
American.
companies
That's
for
what Bernie
shipping
Sanders
jobs
sounds like to
overseas
me.
and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan.
See, no, but the thing is,
Cut
I was making fun
taxes
of it,
for
and, like, what he was
American
talking
workers and
about, that would
American
probably be
families.
pretty
Cut
smart.
taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the
Like
United
if you have,
States of
like, if there's a
America,
bunch of families
but
on the street
penalize
and, like,
companies and countries that are shipping
one
jobs
of them
overseas.
doesn't,
That's the
like,
heart of
is
the
a
economic
stay-at-home
proposal.
mom.
And I
Why
think
not just
what
have
President Trump is saying
like
is that
all
when
the
we
kids
bring
go
in
there
this
for a
additional
bit?
revenue with
You already
higher
know them. You
economic
trust
growth,
them.
we're going to be able
Hopefully.
to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
If you would trust a 14-year-old in high school
Can
who
you
went
clarify
through like
how
a
that will solve the
6-hour
childcare
babysitting
shortage?
course on the weekend
Well, because
to
as
take
Tim
care of your
said,
kids.
a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening,
When I first started streaming, it took me a while to realize that
this is the
that's a
biggest
different
issue.
person
Everybody
from
listening
Tobuscus.
tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not here. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on.
Properly.
Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans
it's basically
and
just a thing to piss off
certified
Trump.
the 2020
That's the only
election
person
results
who cares
and
about
sent
the
a
Wharton
legal
School.
slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative
Basically,
electors.
I mean, that's probably
that
where
has been called
what he feels most comfortable
unconstitutional
talking
and
about.
illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Jan 6
Well, Nora,
question.
first of all, I think that we're focused on the future.
Fake
We need to figure out how to
electors
solve
question.
the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that
That's how they work
2020,
usually.
and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here, and I'm sympathetic.
A lot of commonality
with the senator.
Me too, man.
Yeah. Well, I would have said orange.
This one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot.
A lot of commonality.
Go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't.
How bad do they want those undecided and
like some with the American flag, several later
Republican
died. And it wasn't
switch
just
voters.
in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, "We're marching to the governor's residence, and there may be casualties." The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence."
Yeah, because I was thinking
Pence
much darker red than most.
Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over.
But there are red, but I think either would work.
And I said, as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter.
That would be up to Walz to do that.
I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, It's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we'll win.
Shake hands before it.
But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation.
Stop
they
doing
want
it,
to hear.
though. You've done it
and
so much.
A lot of agreement.
You've said so many nice things about your opponent already.
This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
Sorry, I was playing around with my voice changer.
That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah, well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including
allow posts,
taking an election,
on
and
where?
His vice president's not going to stand to it. That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked.
Oh, is it like saying like is it like flagging like get off his dick and
America,
the F word?
I think you've got a really
okay, yeah,
choice
no,
on
you're
this
fine.
election
Good job, Mantra.
of
That's what it's for. That's why I made you a mod.
Donald Trump.
Governor, your time
I trust your judgment.
Thank you, gentlemen.
No worries.
We will be
Grango.
right back
We're fine with a certain level of
the CBS News vice presidential
curse
debate
words.
continues.
I'd be an absolute hypocrite immediately. I said no swearing. But I trust your judgment, Mantra, about if you know what's egregious enough where you're gonna hit deny. I think I trust which ones you'll hit deny on. Yeah, and I think we're all. I think I'll trust your judgment on which sort of foul language.
When you wake up in the morning,
and
we want to be
shall
your
we
go-to
say,
team.
like basically
Nate has
all
one of the
slurs
quickest
almost.
minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gailey has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two.
You
kind of
have to ban saltine because I think Twitch is Twitch just is a blanket one, which is fine. I just always find saltine is that one's always going to be funny. Honky is always going to be funny to me as well.
Nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Those are they're just funny words in themselves.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
No, you're good. That's what it's for. It's just flagging just in case.
Fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty
and I think they had the one with the Cuban slur one where they got in a lot of trouble, which is just like we're gonna go with the blanket ban, even if the 2 ones for white people are kind of funny to me. We don't need any of them. There's no need. There will never be anything.
Show me the
money! Woo! The 500 bits. Hell yeah, Rango. Thank you very much.
Would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need
I appreciate
to be
it.
Like a John Grisham novel.
For my incredibly brave, trailblazing stance of no slurs allowed.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60.
I'm really going out on a limb here.
85.
Inspire.
How do we
by saying just the really brave thing of don't call each other names.
Brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day
kind of like
a little
Jesus,
more like
almost.
Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Only
Stream
kind.
now on the free CBS News app.
Not pulling the Beatles. So. Yeah, exactly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
And some people may be watching this, and honestly, to defend myself a bit, on Twitch and YouTube, having a blanket ban on slurs, I wouldn't say puts me in the minority, but it's not as much of the majority as you would want it to be. Does that make sense? There should be more of a majority of people who have that stance on
She's the
YouTube
first
and
black
Twitch.
woman on the Supreme Court, and she's determined she won't be the last.
My parents had raised
But
me
it should
to
definitely
believe
be
that I
higher.
could do
It should
anything
definitely
I
be
wanted
higher.
to do.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Could be lower,
on
but
person
it
to
should be
person.
100% should be higher.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
There's some questions that have to be asked.
That's why we're
and need to be
bringing
answered.
professionalism back
True
to
Crime Original,
screen.
48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News
The last
app.
professional online
Superstar
Twitch
approaching,
stream
superstar approaching.
journalist.
I can see clearly now that the rain is gone.
That's right.
Look at his outfit. Give me some love, baby.
Up top.
It's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day.
Don't you
All
put that
right.
evil on me, Ricky Bobby. Oh, you mean, yeah, Twitter is 4chan 2.0. They're calling me 4chan 2.0. I'm like,
Welcome
don't
back
do
to the
that.
CBS
Don't-
News
don't-
vice presidential debate. It is now time for the closing statement. Senator
here we
Vance
go.
won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who
God.
miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters.
Thank them
it
again.
matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built.
2 Minnesota
From Bernie
nice.
Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything.
Is
but they
that
are
a big
truly
tent or is that
optimistic people.
schizophrenic?
They
Who
believe
knows?
in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you that
Is a
that
platform
better than
that
it is
Bernie
the sense
Sanders
of
and
optimism that there can be an opportunity
Dick
economy
Cheney, is that
that works for everyone, not just to get by,
inclusive?
but to get ahead.
Or is it
and the
insane?
idea that freedom really
Who
means
knows?
something. Not the freedom
Voters
of
can
government to be
decide.
in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he's spent 4 years trying to
Basically
maybe
what
do
Maya
that.
Angelou said.
Senator Vance tonight
close enough.
made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets
CBS
that
moderators
opportunity
do
and
too bad.
everybody gets a chance to thrive.
I mean,
I humbly ask for your vote on
Obviously, you
November 5th
disagree
for
with how
Kamala
they frame
Harris.
the question, but
Governor
as
Walz,
far
thank
as
you.
moderation
Senator Vance,
goes,
your closing statement.
I think
Well,
they kept,
Governor
they kept
Walz,
things
you
going
folks at
and
CBS, and of course the American
like,
people for tuning in this evening. And one of
repressed
the issues we didn't talk about was
people
energy.
when they did,
and I
like,
remember
they
when I
did
was
it to
being
both of
raised by
them,
my
repressed
grandmother,
them on a question
when
when they
she didn't have
answer
enough
it.
money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night, and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed.
Yeah, no, they like
been the vice
you
president.
said drill,
for 3.5
baby, drill.
years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail
and the Yemen,
who can't
now that
afford
it's
food,
expanded to Yemen,
but
because
have
Yemen's
the
a much
grace and
larger. I don't know how many.
generosity to ask me how
I mean,
I'm
maybe
doing
it's less of an
and to tell me
impact
they're praying for my
in
family.
the
What that has
US,
taught
but
me is that we have the greatest
there's a much
country,
larger,
the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the
voting
world.
bloc there now.
But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance,
thank
you.
Over 200,000 Yemenis.
And thank you both for participating in the
so
only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
Michigan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35
Dearborn
days
and
until Election Day. Please get out and vote.
Virginia,
and for all of us here
Illinois.
at CBS News, thank you and good night.
No, like that, and that's the thing is, both sides of that, like, I don't want to say debate, but in the U.S. it's a debate. No one's actually getting shot at. Knock on wood. There's no, like, it's just a debate so far in the U.S. No one yell at me.
This election is
but
now complete.
Both sides of the debate sort of
demand
demand
cordial debate of the
complete,
kind that people mostly say they want. You notice here the two candidates lingering on the stage. That's quite a difference
commitment
from,
to their side.
The presidential debate, in which
like,
was not even sure that Vice President
any
Harris
amount
and
of
Donald
trying
Trump
to
would shake
bridge the
hands.
two.
It was a debate in
or
which the
find a
line, I
resolution
appreciate what Tim
almost
said
even
about
gets
Finland, was
accused
one of
of
the many
being,
ways in which
Senator
Vance agreed with the governor. The governor agreed right back. But that's the tone and the kind of theater review of this. I'll pick out two issues. On the question of the top of the news today, which is the Middle East and the kinds of foreign policy surprises that hit any president. Tim Walz made the case that Donald Trump's temperament is unfit for any kind of surprise, cited the members of the Trump
I don't know if I
administration
would
who
say
have attested
too
to
civil.
that.
It was way more civil.
Vice
and
President, or excuse me, Vance came back
it's
and
like,
said,
did we
there were no
have we
wars
just gotten to
during
acclimatize
the Trump
to
administration.
very
On the
like
economy,
aggressive
I'll make a political
debates?
point, which is that What Vance
Like
did was
they
something
didn't
Donald Trump was incapable of
denigrate
doing
each other, or
during his
call each
presidential debate, which
each
is
other
repeatedly
names.
saying,
Like even I was
if
like,
Kamala
stop
Harris is
saying
gonna do
thank
these
you
things,
to him.
why
But it's like
didn't
almost like
she
he
in
should be.
office?
You
Now,
should
whether
be.
voters buy that or not, Tim Walz
That's
mentioned
like
the
that's just a
Inflation
basic
Reduction
like
Act and a variety of others,
level of
other items under
decency.
Biden.
Thank
But
you for this
returning to that
debate. It was
political point
we
has
didn't
worked in the past for Donald Trump against
call
Hillary
each
Clinton.
other
We'll see if
Hitler.
it works this time. I'd like to make a final
at
point
the very
on tone.
least.
The
So
J.D.
thank you
Vance
for
on
that.
stage
That's like
was
I
very
shouldn't be
different
like stop
than
doing that.
what
It's
people may have seen in
I think we
podcasts.
have maybe gotten like
But then there was
acclimatized to
an
the
air of
incivility,
unreality
and we
about
almost
it. He talked
we
about
want we've
bipartisan solutions with nuance.
we've got a taste for
of a
blood
kind
at
we
this
never
point. I
saw
think a little
during the
bit.
Trump administration. He talked about Donald Trump almost as the defender of the Affordable Care Act. Donald Trump tried
Yeah,
to
but you
kill
could
the
say
Affordable Care
deferential.
Act. And then I
There-
think at the
there
very
was-
end of the debate, we
it
saw
was
something
like-
extraordinary. Tim Walz asked
Tim
J.D.
Walz could have
Vance
done
if
more
Donald
to
Trump lost the election.
show
He was incapable of
the
answering
difference
that
between the
simple
two
yes, no
than
question.
anything.
J.D. Vance can only get so far from the man at the top of the ticket, and that was on display in that one moment, although J.D. Vance was a different kind
I think
of
we're doing
person
pretty
than
good.
we've seen in many
But
instances.
John, I think what you're saying.
it is 11 p.m. and I gotta work in the morning. I think we're gonna cap her off there. Good debate. Thanks for hanging around. I'm gonna drop you off somewhere. Who's still online? Good to drop you off. I think Lucid streaming. I'll drop you guys off and Lucid. You guys will play Lucid. All right, everybody. They talk.
I don't know. Yeah, I just.
Oh, they're watching the NBC
whatever.
analysis.
We're gonna see Walz for another month, and then he's gone forever. So
Thanks for the stream. Thanks for the 500 biddies.
You know, in the grand scheme of things, maybe he'll get a cushy like, oh hey, go hang out with Minnesotans at like a turkey trot or something. But like, you know, that's kind of it.
Send him down to
See
Brazil
y'all later.
and meet with like Lula and
Let's
fucking
go. Yeah.
Maduro or
Get
some
him,
shit.
No, get him with
Why didn't that work?
Claudia Sheinbaum, you know, in the new
Yeah.
Mexico administration. Get him like hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Socialist pill my guy a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know, like
It said
whatever.
invalid user.
Like,
oh, I think I just
it's
because I put
fine.
at.
It
That's
was,
why.
You know, I know that's just what VPs are, Chad. It's just like you're not going to hear from either of these people.
There we go.
Doesn't matter
Well,
who wins.
All right.
You won't hear from either of them after.
The real question
Drop
is,
you off the Lucid
what
Fox
is the
School.
ability? What is the ability for Tim Walz to be
Have a good
Dick
night,
Cheney
everybody.
Yeah.
opposite with
Bye-bye
you
now.
know, Bush's?
Oh no.
You know,
Now I hear
that's-
you. Can we get Tim Walz to shoot someone on a hunting trip? Yeah. Okay. All right. And you know, who do we got bets
Alrighty.
on? There's a lot of house.
You ready to go?
Sure.
All right.
Maybe
Great
Blinken
note.
is Secretary of State
Bye
again.
now. And for you.